At the young age of 25, Ludwig Renn joined the Kaiser's beloved army that was to help in the conquest of German victory. Having previously been trained in the 1st Royal Saxon Light Grenadier Regiment, Renn was already familiarized to the army. However, nothing could have prepared him for what he was to encounter on a live battlefield. Having left home without being able to say goodbye to his family, Renn began his journey. Throughout his tour on the Western Front, he served in multiple battles such as the Battle of the Frontiers, First Battle of the Marne, Battle of the Somme, Second Battle of the Aisne, and finally the German Spring Offensive of 1918. Renn painted a portrait of World War I that not many could fully understand. Since Renn was one of the very few who made it through the entire war on the front lines, he has opened a window to show us the many changes that he went through in order to adapt to this new war. As we well know, the spirit of 1914 swept most people off their feet. In Germany, it was a celebration and there promised soon to be victory. Ludwig Renn was one of the many German men that joined the army so that the goal of the fatherland may be obtained. The majority of soldiers cheered and celebrated. Ludwig, however, did not share in rejoicing. He was not one for such banter and did not care to be around it. From the tone of his writing, one could tell a lot about Ludwig. He sounded monotonous, but at the same time, he sounded like he had a purpose, and even said he was lucky to be a part of the war effort. Was I not lucky to have the chance of seeing a war? What wretched luck for those whose youth went by without one. With this new adventure underway, Ludwig was soon to learn the grim reality of war. The Battle of the Frontiers was the first real experience of war that Ludwig had come to, and it was certainly evident. After coming into contact with Belgian resistance, Ludwig fell into a state of panic. Rifle fire, machine guns, shelling, and falling comrades were thrust onto him in an instant. As he tried to assess the situation and make the best decision for his men, the new environment impeded his judgment. In all the confusion, Renn and his men ended up taking cover behind a house. Reflecting on his performance brought a great deal of stress to him. Seeing the wounded and dead in the lying wake of this battle, and the roaring of the guns in the distance made him feel ill. He thought that his actions made him seem like a coward for hiding during battle. This was a cardinal rule that they were taught. Those who run and hide are nothing but cowards. Although Renn felt this rule was illogical and stated, if he had run onto the field like a true hero, then him and his friends would be one of the many wounded and or dead. Then what good would that be? As the day went and the night came, it was impossible for him to think of anything else other than what had just preceded. One can only imagine the immense stress that is brought on by fear and death. That night, he cried himself to sleep while one of his friends comforted him. The day after his first battle, he reminisced to what he believed the battle would be like. He had daydreams of all the heroic actions that come along with war, carrying an officer off of the field of battle to safety, or maybe striking down the enemy after terrifying hand-to-hand combat. War had been a daydream up until now. Reality settled in, and Renn was forced to adjust. The skirmishes at Le Mans and Lugny were interesting moments for Renn and his adjustment to war. As the skirmish of Le Mans showed, Renn exhibited a large change from the previous fight against the Belgians. Renn's state of mind during the next battle was much clearer, and he was able to focus on the task at hand even in the middle of battle. With the German front overtaking at Le Mans, the French were pushed back to Lugny. During the skirmish at Lugny, Renn takes control of a squad and shows tremendous bravery during the firefight. Just as Renn was getting comfortable with this current situation, he finds out that things can always get worse. Unable to find his friends at the end of the skirmish, he receives the news that one was killed and the other was wounded. Directly after this news, nothing more was said about his friends, not even what he felt at the time. Interpreting this as a sign of disbelief, Renn wasn't at all prepared for the loss of comrades. During September of 1914, the First Battle of the Marne took place. As a defining moment for the Allied forces, it also marked a defining moment for Ludwig Renn. For this is the first time he talks of killing an enemy. I covered the nearest man. Shots rang out. I pulled the trigger. He fell. I loaded again. A very cold description of Renn taking human life. He did not feel sorry for the life he just took. He did not cry. He did not think. He did not miss a beat. He continued to fight until an order was given to fall back. They were losing this battle, and were being told to retreat. This new Renn that has just been introduced to us did not like the idea of retreat. He talked of how sick it made him feel. Ever since his first battle, he had something he wanted to prove. He wanted to show that he is better than running and hiding. He wanted to fight. Even with his newfound motivation, he could not stop the inevitable. Others around him, his friends and battle buddies, would sooner or later be injured or killed. While still in retreat from the Battle of Marne, Renn found himself saying goodbye to 3 more friends. Although only injured, they would be unable to stay in the fight. As he helped load them on a medical transport, he could think of nothing to say as they were driven away. Renn did not mention his exact feelings. However, the general tone of this scene was complete sadness. Trench warfare was introduced to Renn and his company after the retreat of the German offensive on the Western Front. The new introduction to a standstill war was a shock to many men. Renn and his company are a good example of how this new element affected soldiers. Before their deployment to the trenches, men were talking about rumors of a dreadful meadow of death, and how some parts of the line were only 150 yards away from each other. This seemed to give Ludwig a severe case of anxiety. After arriving and settling in, men quickly established a daily routine and changed attitudes towards the trenches. Boredom set in rapidly. Even Renn resorted to picking on a new recruit, which was very much out of character. He teased the new recruit about daily shelling and grueling chores, and was very pleased at the petrified look he received from the young man. Eventually, morale in the trenches started to sink, day by day. Renn was lucky to find a way to lift his spirits in the trenches. He took over responsibility of the trench library. As boring as this may seem, it was a great thing for Renn, for if he had not taken library duties, he may not have written any of these accounts. In his spare time, he read deeply into philosophy and studied many literature books. Of his newfound hobby, writing seemed to be his favorite. When I got up from my writing, I was stiff and frozen, but there was a gladness in me that made everything look bright. Although writing did not take away the complete dislike of the trenches, it helped Renn to get through. The most notable changes in Renn came from the Battle of the Somme. By the summer of 1916, it seemed as though nothing could faze him. He has been witness to countless deaths and mutilations of war. However, one thing does not bother Renn himself: death. While some might cower at the thought of it, he was unaffected by it. My dream preoccupied me, and the fact that I had not been afraid of dying, that was right somehow. If one gets a bullet through one's head, well, it's no matter, it concerns only oneself. This is a very interesting statement showing a new outlook on his life. Renn has accepted death as a fact in this war. After his epiphany, he makes sure that it's known that he is no longer afraid. Walking by a new recruit cowering in the trenches, he stood high above him and asked, "What is there to be afraid of?" Of course, this didn't reassure the boy in the least bit. He took pride in showing the young man that it's better to be fearless. A most interesting encounter came when Renn was talking to one of his sentries. With that, he turned towards me, and I saw he hadn't the least trace of fear. What if he was killed next? I should feel really sorry, for he was a good man. I wouldn't be killed myself, I felt quite sure of that. Another interesting statement that could show yet another change in his attitude towards death. No longer after his acceptance of death, he actually decided himself to reject death. Since he has survived this long, Renn has seemingly decided that he won't die in this war. Even though death wasn't able to reach him in Somme, it was able to injure him. After his leave due to his injury, Renn returns to service in the trenches of Aisne as an NCO. In just a few short weeks of being a sergeant, he now had another obsession: protecting his men. This proved to be a most difficult task for Ludwig, for he did not want to show his men his fear. But he could not keep his composure. During a full-on barrage by the French guns, Renn was stricken by dread. He knew that men were going to get wounded and killed, and this clearly upset him. However, before a short offensive movement, Renn was trying his hardest to fight off his emotions. Everyone must settle his own fears, I thought. I can't help you. I can't let you pull me down. Even with his fear of losing his men and doing what is right for them, Renn covers his secret and hides it from others. This protective cover that Renn had put up would not last long in a war such as this. Renn can no longer take that pressure and stress of war, when at last he comes to his breaking point. One of his orderlies and best friend, Israel, dies. That night, alone, he cried himself to sleep. He was no longer the same man after this. His mind often wandered, and it seemed as though he was lost. During several firefights, he was unable to keep himself in check. Others were forced to step in and help him out. The March offensive was the last fighting he would see. Losing most of his friends and being injured himself, Renn was sent behind the lines again. Coming back into service just before the war was over, Renn was thrown into a different company and again seemed a changed man. Just by the writing, one can tell that Renn was there only physically and not mentally. Set on autopilot, Renn and his new company were marching their way back to the front line. Morale was at an all-time low. Someone attempted to talk to him of politics, but he had no interest in it. It is able to be seen that the war had cost him a great price. His friends were long gone, and no one back home would be able to feel what he was going through. He survived the war. He has been to hell and back, seen unimaginable sights, and faced fear itself. Sergeant Ludwig Renn, forever changed.